How can you make your raised beds last longer? That is the question we're tackling today because, oh my goodness, raised beds, they cost a pretty penny. If you are putting in a garden, then you've probably already started to do the math and realize that raised beds may be the biggest investment you make when it comes to putting your garden together. Now, we've talked before about the value of raised beds. You know, I love gardening with raised beds. Let's just recap those reasons and then we'll get into the 5 steps to make those beds last longer because you're spending lots and lots and lots of money on them. So I use raised beds, one, because it makes gardening easy. So a raised bed means that you don't have to put on your garden boots, you don't have to grab a hoe and a shovel. You literally walk out with maybe just your hands, maybe a pair of scissors, and immediately you're right into the garden and you're getting the things that you need for dinner that night. Raised beds are easy to work in. They are going to be at least 6 inches to 2 feet tall. And so you're not doing as much bending and kneeling. You're literally just maybe even sitting on the side of a raised bed in order to take care of it. And when you're planting, you're not bent over, hurting your back. They're just so much simpler to work in. They're so much more comfortable. So that's one of the reasons to use raised beds. Next, you get to start with great soil. We know that soil is the magic thing. It is the thing when it comes to the garden. So with a raised bed, you start right away with perfect soil where you can just get growing right away. I love a sandy loam soil, compost, topsoil, and coarse sand mixed with some earthworm castings. Put all those together, and that is my favorite soil blend for a raised bed. So you're going to have great soil. Then you can double or triple your planting. So with in-ground gardening, your plants are spreading out. They need tons of room to spread those roots out because they can't go deep. But with a raised bed, your roots go deep, which means your plants can be super close together. You're going to get 2 to 3 times the growth out of a raised bed space more than you would if you're planting directly into the ground. Next, they drain quickly. So almost all vegetable plants, things we're growing to eat, they don't like to stay wet. They don't like wet roots. And so with an in-ground garden, you're going to get mold, mildew, deterioration of the plant because those roots are just sitting in pretty wet clay soil. In a raised bed, boom, they drain quickly. I've had clients live in very heavily flooded areas. They'll send me a picture. The flood is all around their beds and their beds are dried out. That's how well these raised beds drain. So draining, great soil, easy to care for, and then they're just beautiful. So your vegetable garden is going to rise and fall all year long, and each season it's going to look little and then it'll look big and then it'll look little again. The raised beds give your landscape consistency. A lot of people aren't growing their own food because they think a vegetable garden is UGLY. And yes, that is a 4-letter word when it comes to vegetable gardening because the vegetables are so beautiful. And a raised bed will make your space beautiful all year long, even while the plants are small, medium, and large. No matter what the plants are looking like, the raised beds will make your garden beautiful and you'll be proud of it even when plants aren't in there yet. All right, so have I convinced you to use a raised bed? Hopefully so. Let's talk about once you get the raised bed, now that you're convinced, how do you make this raised bed last longer? Because these things are an investment. First things first, to make your raised beds last longer is start with the best materials you can afford. We all have a different budget when it comes to the garden, and so I just always tell everybody, go as nice as you can afford. So if for you, that's a really inexpensive bed at Lowe's or Home Depot, that's fine, but get the nicest bed your money will buy you. This is the place in your garden to spend more money, not less. So I would prefer you start with all seeds rather than skimping on this raised bed, right? So later you can move to plants, later you can move to a nicer trellis, but it's very hard to start again with your raised beds. Next up, once you get those boards, you want to prep the boards before you put them together. So it's great to go ahead and treat them with an eco-friendly treatment that basically seals in the moisture, seals in the fibers of that wood so that they won't deteriorate over time. So we at the Gardenary shop, we have a whey product, an eco-friendly stain that you put on your wood that kind of closes all those cells up so they're not constantly absorbing soil and water and moisture in the seasons to come. So seal your wood. I think there's also linseed oil. There's a few different options of ways that you can seal your wood, but seal your wood before you start to construct your garden. You want to get the edges, all of the corners, every piece and part of your wood. Go ahead and seal it before you construct the raised bed. That's number two. Once you have constructed the raised bed, I highly recommend putting trim on the wood. So I like to add trim on the corners and then on the top of the raised bed. I was clued into how this helps with longevity with a couple of cedar bed companies I worked with at the very beginning. They would insure the trimmed beds longer than they would insure the untrimmed beds. So when you had these raw edges of wood that were exposed to the natural elements, then they would insure those beds for a shorter period of time than if we closed all of those open grain areas with trim. The next thing that I love to do to make my raised beds last longer is putting them on gravel, or at least getting the edges of the bed off of the soft earth. Now, if you want to use mulch around your garden space, if you don't want to do gravel, that's fine. But there is a great value in getting rocks, getting a solid material underneath your wooden raised beds right at this stage. And let me tell you why. First, it's going to decrease the deterioration of the wood on the bottom of your bed. So all that surface area of your bed that's touching the ground, you really want it on an area that's going to be draining quickly, that's going to dry out, that's not going to hold moisture. So by putting it onto gravel, that gravel is going to get rained on and then boom, drop that rain right off. And so your beds are not going to be sitting on wet material for long, which will help them last longer. The last thing to do to make your raised beds last longer is simply to keep your kitchen garden area clear of debris. So essentially what we've talked through with all these points is that, raised beds made out of wood are a natural material that is degrading, right? We know that if you pile up some sticks, if you pile up some wood, it's in the process of dying. It's in the process of decomposing. And that is true for the wood that you're using for your raised beds. That wood is on its way to becoming soil eventually, right? We'll try to keep it as long as we can. But all those natural materials, those natural carbons and fibers, they're turning back into the earth the way that the earth works, right? And so we want to slow that process. And part of slowing that process is, of course, getting thicker wood. It'll degrade slower. And then trimming it out, so having less of those raw edges exposed, and then putting it on gravel so that it is in a clean space, that it drains quicker. And then finally, we want to make sure that it is also in a clear area, a clean area. So if you've been in a garden area for a while, if you've been gardening for a bit, we've got so many materials coming in and out of the garden space. We've got soil and we've got plants and we've got fruit dropping and seeds dropping. We've got leaves everywhere. And so one of the main things that I found over the years is just keeping all the surrounding space, all the space around my raised beds clear of debris. Making sure I clean it out maybe once a week is really helpful in terms of preserving that wood. We want to think about having as few few natural materials up close and touching the wood as possible. And when you do that, this is going to help your raised beds last so much longer. All right, so there you have it. Raised beds are totally worth it if you want a beautiful garden space that you want to hang out in, that's enjoyable to tend. If you want a space that's more productive, where you can plant 2 to 3 times as many plants. If you want a space that keeps your plants healthier by draining quickly and keeping all that water off of your plants' roots, raised beds are totally worth it because they stay beautiful year round. But we've got to protect our investment. The way you do it is buying the best wood possible, treating that wood before you start to construct your beds, putting trim on all the edges of your raised bed, placing your raised beds on a nice, sturdy, dry material like gravel, and then finally keeping your garden area nice and dry and clean and clear. If you follow these steps, your raised beds should last you somewhere between 5 to 10 years. I have clients that I set up gardens for way back in 2015, 2016. Their raised beds are still doing great. So we're 8 years in right now. I followed all the steps and processes I've outlined for you today. And their beds are still standing, still growing, and doing great. Listen, if you want to know, once you get those raised beds set up, how to plant your garden, how to know when to plant your garden, you got to check out the Gardenary calendar. You can find it at gardenary.com/calendar. I've got all the dates for you that you need to know. All you got to do is give me 2 dates about your town or city, and I'll give you all the rest of the details. You can find the link for that right below this video. I'm also going to put some links below this video about our raised beds. We do carry some incredibly beautiful cedar raised beds in the Gardenary shop. Plus, we have a wood preservative that I love using, and I think you'll love using it too. If you got questions about raised beds or anything about gardening, put it in the comments and I'll make a video for it next.